Hi everyone, I've got a quick tutorial for you today on a technique called spit splicing, which I think we can all agree is just a beautiful name. And this is a technique for joining a new ball of yarn. This technique will help to minimize the number of ends that you have to weave in, which most knitters find an irritating thing to have to worry about when a project is done. So we want to cut down on that as much as possible. The most important thing here is that you can use this technique only for non-superwash wool. This is not going to work for cotton. It is not going to work for superwash wool. It is not going to work for silk. It has to be nice, non-superwash wool. The more rustic, the better for this to work, because what essentially we're going to do is felt the two ends of our yarn together. And in order to do that, you need those little scales that are on the natural wool that help the wool fibers stick together. So, not superwash. The reason this is called spit splicing is because you need a little bit of liquid to do it, and most knitters, what they have readily available while they're working is spit, but we're going to be using actual water. So what we're going to do, if your yarn is plied, you're going to go ahead and pull it apart a little bit, because you don't want your yarn to be too thick once it is felted together. So I'm going to pull off, a few inches of one ply. This is a 2-ply yarn from my new yarn. And these rustic wools, this works well. You can kind of just pull it. You don't have to cut. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the yarn that is coming from my project. I'm going to pull apart and take a few inches of one ply off. If you're using an unplied yarn, you can still do this, but what you may want to do is to twist the yarn in the opposite direction so the fibers loosen up, so you can remove part of that strand. Then in one hand, I'm going to lay that what is now a single ply from my working yarn, and I'm going to overlap it with the ply from my new ball of yarn. They do not have to be exactly the same length. It's not super important, but they should overlap and come together on either end where you start back having 2 plies again. So I'm going to just lay them next to each other in one hand. Then I'm going to add a little bit of water. And as I said, you may certainly use spit, but water is also excellent. So we add a little bit of water, and I'm just going to start rubbing them together. So what we're using is friction, heat, and water to encourage the fibers to stick together. So you can see here that those fibers have stuck together pretty well. And I'm just going to keep doing that along all the parts. Add a little bit more water and do it again. Just a little bit of water. You don't want it to be sopping wet. And then go back to the opposite end. You can see one of the plies still sticking out. I'll add a little bit more water. And again, you need all three. You need heat, friction, and liquid of some kind. And you're just going to rub those 2 plies together until they stick together or felt. Now this is what happens when you accidentally put your wool sweater in the washing machine. The water and the heat and the friction will cause all of those fibers in your wool to stick together. And you can see now these yarns have been joined together. There we go. Now Now it's in focus. Now you can also see it doesn't look nice and neatly plied like the rest of the yarn. That's fine. It's a small, length of the yarn. It's not super important that it look identical to the rest of the yarn, but it is about the same thickness as the yarn, and it is nice and stuck together. And now you can move continuously from your working yarn to your new ball of yarn. No ends to weave in, nothing to worry about. Just keep knitting.